Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This video is criticising Mr. Benjamin Shapiro for his bogus accusations of anti-Semitism. I remember reading an article by the editor of the Jewish Chronicle about 10 years ago. The Jewish Chronicle is the United Kingdom's main Jewish newspaper, and the editor of it said, one of the few things which is just as odious as anti-Semitism is knowingly making false accusations of anti-Semitism, and this is precisely what Mr. Shapiro does. The thing is, one scarcely needs to invent anti-Semitism. There's enough of it around already, or more than enough. Ideally, none of it would exist. So don't dream it up when it's not there. You could be busy enough trying to tackle real anti-Semitism, which is, of course, odious. So going back to about 2014, when Mr. Shapiro accused President Obama of anti-Semitism and being a Jew hater, I thought it was a revolting thing to do, and so flagrantly false. The fact that Mr. Shapiro would make such a blatantly bogus accusation surely destroys his credibility and casts a pall of doubt over any other contentious statements he's made. So in other times, if you're not sure he's telling the truth or not, don't give him the benefit of the doubt, because he has unblushingly told these flagrantly untrue things. So it goes back to 2014 when Israel and the Palestinians were fighting each other, and because President Obama said that both sides ought to show restraint. Is that bad to want to de-escalate the conflict so fewer people get killed? Ideally, nobody gets killed, and Shapiro just can't take it that President Obama should never call for the Israelis to kill not quite so many people, or indeed the Palestinians. And of course, Israel's military response is always maximalist. Okay, they don't use nuclear weapons, but that would be a step too far even for them. Then someone like Pakistan might hit them, a Muslim country with nuclear arms. Now, when Obama said that people shouldn't be killed in Syria, does that make him Muslim-hating or not? Of course not, even though Muslims are doing the killing and the ones being killed on both sides in most cases. Or make him Syrian-hating or something like that, or Arab-hating? Of course not. Nobody says he's anti-Muslim or anti-Arab for saying that Hamas shouldn't kill so many Israelis. So, and Mr. Shapiro said that this military action was against those who kidnap kids, i.e. all Palestinians were responsible. They were all to be punished. They were all to suffer, as in huge numbers of Palestinian civilians were killed as per usual. And Mr. Shapiro had the chutzpah to claim that the Obama administration was anti-Israel. This from an administration which shared technology, military technology, shared intelligence with the Israeli government, and voted billions of dollars to go to Israel. It couldn't be more false if Mr. Shapiro tried. These are bare-faced lies, and he knows it. But he goes on telling these unblushingly, speaking with poise, speaking at high speed, as though somehow that lends it authority and makes it more credible. I remember 4 years ago, Mr. Shapiro also saying there was a criminal case against Obama. Wonder what happened to that one. Why has that never been prosecuted? He doesn't talk about that one anymore, and I think I can hazard a guess why. So, President Obama, remember, as soon as he got the Democratic nomination, he was invited to address the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee and cheered to the echo by them. And when he went to Israel, he was often cheered to the rafters there too. And he said he would prevent Iran obtaining nuclear weapons, and he achieved that goal in his 8 years. So he did what the Israelis wanted him to with regard to Libya, taking out one of their main foes, with regard to Syria, because they would like to see Assad fall. Didn't quite happen, but they don't want to see ISIS rise either. So when he was in the Congress, he voted money for Israel as a senator. So, and think of the Iron Dome, that's Israel's system to try and stop Hamas rockets. And again, the money and most of the technology of that came from the United States, some of it under Obama's administration. So this is just yet more evidence that Mr. Shapiro was spinning absolute lies. It's revolting that he should be so flagrantly deceitful like that. So anyone who makes the mildest, most reasoned criticism of the Israeli government is anti-Semitic, according to Mr. Shapiro. Calling the illegal occupation what it is anti-Jewish, according to him. When there have been many UN votes, and that is world opinion, saying that Israel should withdraw from these illegally occupied territories. And that's that. And some Palestinians were kicked out of their homes, literally kicked out of their homes. Likewise, Jewish people in Morocco and Iraq and so forth were kicked out of their homes. Equally reprehensible. I don't know of anyone in the United States who defends that sort of behaviour. When President Obama was invited to Israel, why on earth would the Israeli government do this if he was anti-Jewish? Because he's not remotely anti-Jewish. And he has plenty of Jewish supporters, Jewish people in his cabinet. The evidence is absolutely overwhelming. It's incontestable. It's beyond argument that he's not anti-Jewish. In fact, he's pro-Jewish. He visited the Holocaust Memorial Museum. Why on earth would they invite him to do so if he was even a teensy bit anti-Semitic? An anti-Semite wouldn't do all this either. So anyone who doesn't do exactly what the Israeli government wants is anti-Semitic, so it would seem. And by the way, there's of course a vigorous debate in Israel about what they should be doing. That's democracy, and we're often hearing that Israel's a democracy, and it is. So if anyone in Israel, a Jewish person, criticizes their own government, that makes them anti-Jewish too. This is nonsense. So it's excessive military response from Israel that exacerbates the very anti-Semitism that Mr. Shapiro claims to revile. And of course, anti-Semitism, like all forms of prejudice, is despicable. So it's odd that Mr. Shapiro should be so exercised by this, when of course he wrote for Breitbart for a few years, and then he suddenly discovered there were anti-Semites there. Now, it's true that there were some pro-Jewish and pro-Israel commentators on Breitbart, but it had a large white supremacist following, and everyone knows that the white supremacist movement and anti-Semitism overlap very considerably, but this seemed to come as news to Mr. Shapiro. I don't think he's got the excuse of idiocy, so obviously he knew what he was doing, getting into bed with anti-Jewish bigots, because, well, I'm not sure. Fame, money, what motivates him? Yes, and he published this bogus claim that Republican politician Chuck Hagel went to an event sponsored by Friends of Hamas and no group of that name exists. That was in 2013. Another utterly bogus statement by Mr. Shapiro. Anyway, and Hamas, by the way, which he so reviles, was supported by Israel a lot in the 80s. You can see a Wall Street Journal article about that. It came out in 2009, or Yale University Press has published a book about the same thing. The Israeli governor of Gaza, yes, it was an occupied territory for a long time, Yitzhak Segev, he met Sheikh Hassin, the spiritual father of Hamas, many times in the 80s, and even arranged for Sheikh Yassin to have hospital treatment in Israel. Sheikh Hassin was later assassinated by an Israeli army rocket. So, and who's really anti-Semitic? I suppose Mr. Shapiro is, since Arab people are Semites too. They're meant to be descended from Shem. Semite applies to Arabs as well as Jews, and as there are far more Arab people than there are Jews, it's much more anti-Semitic to be anti-Arab than it is to be anti-Jewish. And who's really proposing racist policies? There was an article that Mr. Shapiro published way back in about 2004 calling for all Arab Israelis to be kicked out of Israel. Talk about that for racial discrimination, to have their rights of citizenship stripped from them. How disgustingly bigoted is that? And there's obviously racial discrimination, which is practiced in the occupied territories. Jewish-only roads, wouldn't accept white-only roads in the United States or something like that. So it's really vomit-inducing what Mr. Shapiro has been doing. All right, I realise that a country has the right to defend itself, but it should do so with restraint, trying to keep casualty figures down, not to maximise them. And I do realise that the Israeli government does take some steps towards that. It could be worse. And obviously, Israel does have a better human rights record than many other countries in the region. But really what I'm taking issue with here is Mr. Shapiro's blatant and outright dishonesty, which really is despicable. And that is the standard go-to argument for any reasoned criticism of the Israeli government, any of their policies, that you must be anti-Jewish if you say anything we don't like, which is obviously complete rubbish.